The Texas Panhandle in March 1868 wore a gray sky like a bruise. The storm had passed, but its temper still lingered. Puddles glistened like bits of mirror, and the wind dragged the smell of wet clay and cattle across the open plain. Somewhere along the flooded trail, a wagon leaned on one broken wheel, its canvas torn to ribbons. Inside, a woman whispered to her sleeping child, voice thin as thread, "We haven't eaten in 5 days, sweetheart. But you rest now, Mama's here." Her name was Clara Wynne, 28 years old and already weathered by loss. Her daughter, Emma, was 7, too light, too pale, a cough rattling in her chest like a broken music box. Clara's hands, red and cracked from the cold, pulled the girl closer. The candle beside them sputtered, its tiny flame dancing in protest against the wind, sneaking through the wagon seams. Clara had fled Missouri with nothing but grief and grit. Her husband, Thomas, had died the previous winter fever and debt, finishing him faster than the frost. Then came his brother, Silas Wynne, claiming the child's inheritance as his own and offering Clara protection. Protection, she'd learned, could look a lot like possession. So one moonless night she'd taken Emma and run south, chasing rumors of land and mercy. Now, knee-deep in Texas mud, she wondered if mercy was only a story told by desperate folks. Thunder murmured far away. The candle flickered out. In the hush that followed, she heard hoofbeats, not galloping, slow, deliberate, a rhythm that spoke of caution rather than pursuit. She held her breath, one arm around Emma, the other gripping the empty rifle that had become more prayer than weapon. A shape formed through the rain. A tall rider on a weary bay horse, oilskin coat dripping, hat pulled low. He reined in, studying the wrecked wagon. "Anyone alive in there?" he called, his voice carrying a calm that somehow cut through the storm. Clara hesitated. "Who's asking?" "Just a man riding home with a pocket full of rain," he said. Then, softer, "You got a child with you?" "Yes." He swung down from the saddle. Mud swallowed his boots to the ankles. "Don't mean to scare you, ma'am," he said, reaching into his pack. "Found myself some bread this morning. Not fresh, but it's honest." He unwrapped a rough half loaf and held it out. Clara's fingers shook as she took it. The crust was hard, but the warmth from his hand lingered on hers. "Thank you," she whispered. He tipped his hat. "Storm's moving east. I'll check on you come sunup." Then he was gone, horse and rider fading into the mist like the storm's last secret. Clara broke the bread, gave Emma the first piece, and tasted hope for the first time in months. Rain tapped soft on the canvas above. Somewhere out there, a stranger rode through darkness, proof that not every shadow in the west carried a gun. That night, the widow slept without praying for dawn to come quickly. She had something better than prayer, now she had a promise. Despair on the trail morning arrived slow and gray. The storm had left behind puddles that steamed beneath the weak sun. The plains smelled of wet grass and the faint sweetness of mesquite. Clara sat outside the wagon, her skirt soaked to the knees, watching Emma sleep under a ragged quilt. Half the bread remained, wrapped in cloth like treasure. She didn't know the stranger's name, but she replayed his words in her head until they felt like scripture. Not fresh, but it's honest. Missouri haunted her still. Every gust of wind sounded like Silas shouting her name. Every crow's cry felt like footsteps behind her. She wondered how far a man like him would ride to claim what wasn't his. Then she looked at Emma's thin arms and decided it didn't matter, she'd outrun him again if she had to. The ground quivered faintly. Another rider. Her heart clenched. But when the figure came into view, she recognized the same bay horse, the same oilskin coat. Relief loosened something in her chest she hadn't known was tight. "Storm's clear," the man said, drawing up beside the wagon. "Trail ain't. You'll get stuck trying to move that thing. We can't stay here," she replied. He nodded. Didn't figure you'd want to. My ranch is 5 miles west. Got coffee, fire, dry blankets. Seeing her hesitation, he added, "Ain't askin' for company, ma'am. Just don't sit right leavin' folks to freeze." His tone carried no demand, just quiet certainty. Clara bit her lip. "I don't even know your name." "Elias Cole." He tipped his hat. "And you?" "Clara Wynne. This is Emma." "Well, Miss Wynne," he said, "how about we see if my coffee's as good as my bread?" Before fear could talk her out of it, Clara lifted Emma into his arms. The child stirred, then nestled against his shoulder as if she'd known him forever. They rode west, beneath a sky clearing to pale blue. Elias's horse trudged through the mud, the rhythmic plod of hooves steady as a heartbeat. After a while, he spoke. "Was headin' back from driving cattle near Amarillo. Didn't expect company on the road." Clara managed a faint smile. "Neither did I." The horizon opened ahead, rolling land dotted with mesquite and cedar. And for the first time since leaving Missouri, Clara began to imagine something that didn't end in running. When the cabin appeared, a small log house crouched beside a corral, it looked to her like a miracle carved from patience. Smoke curled from the chimney, chickens scattered as they approached. Elias dismounted and held out his hand. "Welcome, ma'am. Ain't fancy, but it'll keep the wind out." She took his hand. It was rough, warm, real. For the first time in months, she believed she might live past tomorrow. The rancher arrives inside the cabin. Heat from the stove rolled through the single room, wrapping around her like comfort she didn't trust yet. Elias moved easily through the space, hanging his hat, stirring the pot on the fire, setting out tin bowls. "Sit. You look ready to topple." Clara obeyed, still wary but too tired to pretend strength. Emma, wide-eyed, stared at the shelves lined with jars and the patchwork curtain fluttering by the window. It felt impossibly homely. Elias served them stew beans, a scrap of salt pork, thick gravy. Clara's first spoonful burned her tongue and melted her fear. Emma ate fast, coughing between bites. Elias poured water from a jug. "Easy now, little one. Food ain't running away." After supper, he asked quietly, "You got kin waiting for you somewhere?" "Not anymore." He didn't pry, just nodded once and said, "Then you stay here till the trail's dry." When she protested, he cut her off gently. "Don't argue hospitality, ma'am. It's bad manners in these parts." He pointed toward the bedroom. "Take the bed. I'll bunk in the barn." "You don't have to." "Wasn't a debate," he said with a faint smile. "Besides, the barn's where I sleep most nights anyhow. Horses snore softer than I do." That made her laugh, small but genuine. The sound seemed to surprise them both. Later, when Emma drifted to sleep, Clara stood by the window watching Elias outside, lantern light glinting on his hair as he brushed the mare. He moved with quiet purpose, like a man who'd learned that noise invited trouble. And she thought, maybe goodness doesn't announce itself. Maybe it just shows up and fixes what's broken. Outside, Elias looked back at the window once, saw the faint silhouette of mother and child, and felt something unfamiliar stir inside him, a need not to ride away. A shelter and a promise. By morning, the storm had finally broken for good. The Texas sky opened wide and clean, painted in shades of washed-out blue. Mist rose off the grass like breath. Elias was already outside when Clara woke, chopping wood with even practiced swings. Every strike echoed steady, sure, the rhythm of a man who kept his world together one task at a time. Clara stood in the doorway, holding her daughter close. For the first time in months, the air smelled of something other than fear, smoke, pine, and coffee. Elias noticed her watching and smiled faintly. "Coffee's hot. Mind the step. That board's got a grudge." Inside, the small cabin glowed with morning light. The kettle hissed on the stove, and the table was set with 2 cups, a small plate of cornbread, and a tin of honey. "I figured you'd earned a proper breakfast," Elias said. Clara's throat tightened. "I can't pay you for all this." He shrugged. "Didn't figure you could. I ain't running a hotel." She almost laughed but bit it back. Gratitude felt dangerous. She'd been punished for it before. Yet something about his tone made her believe that this man's kindness wasn't a trade. After breakfast, Elias hitched his horse and rode out to check the herd. Clara swept the floor, scrubbed the dishes, and mended the torn curtain. It wasn't obligation. It was instinct. The house wanted living in, and she knew how to do that. When he returned at sundown, the fire was lit, and Emma was humming quietly over a rag doll Clara had stitched from an old shirt. Elias paused at the door, looking at them both. "Been a long time since this place sounded like home," he said softly. Clara met his eyes. Maybe it just needed someone to listen. That night, he left a lantern burning on the porch before heading to the barn. The small circle of light glowed through the dark like a promise. "You're safe here." For years, Clara had survived by expecting the worst of men. Elias was forcing her to remember what goodness felt like, and that frightened her more than hunger ever had. Wounds, whispered pasts, and growing trust. The days slipped by gentle as creek water. Elias worked the cattle, Jed fixed the fences, and Clara found purpose again in small things. Baking bread, tending a garden patch, brushing the mare's coat until it gleamed. Emma followed her everywhere, her laughter mixing with birdsong. One evening, Clara found Elias at the table, lamplight catching the rough lines on his face as he mended Emma's dress. His big hands fumbled with the needle, but he kept at it patiently. "You can sew?" she asked. He chuckled. "My pa died when I was 10. You learn a lot faster when no one's around to do it for you." She smiled, sitting across from him. "You must have been lonely." He looked up. "Still am sometimes, but lonely's easier than hollow. Work keeps the first from becoming the second." The honesty in his tone disarmed her. Silence stretched comfortable between them. Then he said, "You never told me why you were traveling that road alone." Clara stared at her hands. "Because staying where I was would have killed me slower." And she told him about Missouri, her husband's sickness, Silas's threats, the debts, the night she ran. When she finished, Elias poured her a cup of coffee and said quietly, "You did right. The man who raises his hand to own another soul forfeits his own." The words sank deep. No pity, no judgment, just understanding. The next morning, Clara watched him mend a broken fence. The wind whipped his hair, sunlight carving strength across his shoulders. For the first time, she wondered what his story was, what wounds he carried under all that calm. That afternoon, Emma wandered too close to the corral. The gray stallion spooked, rearing high. Clara screamed. Elias moved faster than thought, shoving the girl clear. The hoof clipped his arm with a crack that turned her blood cold. By the time she reached him, blood ran down his sleeve. "Sit," she ordered, her voice shaking. He obeyed with a wince. "Ain't nothin'." She tore her apron, ripped into strips, binding the cut with trembling hands. "You could have been killed." He met her eyes, smiling faintly. "Some things are worth standing in front of." She froze. Words deserted her. The room seemed to hold its breath. That night, she sat long after the fire died, watching him sleep in the chair by the door, his injured arm resting across his chest. The light from the coals painted him in shades of gold and shadow, and Clara understood what she'd been feeling since the moment he'd offered her that loaf of bread. This wasn't charity. It was the beginning of trust, and trust, in a world like theirs, was rarer than gold. The tenderness of home spring came like a sigh. The plains turned green, soft with new grass, and wildflowers spilled across the hills. The air smelled of earth and rain, and everything starting over. Emma learned to ride with Elias's steady hand on the reins. Her laughter rang clear and fearless, a sound Clara had almost forgotten existed. She'd stand on the porch, apron dusted with flour, watching them circle the corral, sunlight catching the dust around them like gold. Inside, she filled the house with life-fresh bread cooling on the windowsill, wildflowers in jars, clean sheets airing on the line. Jed teased Elias one evening. "Never thought I'd see the day this place looked like somebody lived in it." Elias grinned. "Maybe I just needed the right foreman." But peace is a fragile thing for people who've lived too long without it. Some nights, Clara woke from dreams of Missouri, of Silas's voice, of fire, of running. On those nights, she'd sit by the window, trembling. Once Elias found her there and didn't speak. He just draped a blanket over her shoulders and stood beside her until the shaking stopped. When she finally whispered, "He said he'd find us," Elias answered. "Then he'll find he rode too far." That simple sentence settled into her bones like warmth. After that, the nightmares came less often. Emma started calling him Uncle Eli. The first time she said it, he nearly dropped his hammer. Clara laughed harder than she had in years. And for the rest of the day, Elias couldn't stop smiling. The ranch began to hum with quiet purpose. In the evenings, they'd all sit on the porch, Jed with his fiddle, Emma dancing barefoot in the dust, Clara humming softly beside Elias. Home didn't mean walls. It meant laughter that stayed even after the music stopped. And though Clara didn't say it out loud, she'd stopped thinking of leaving. For the first time since she'd fled Missouri, she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. The unwelcome return. Late summer rolled in wearing a sky of copper heat. The cattle grazed slow, the wheat swayed tall, and the rhythm of the ranch fell into something close to grace. But peace in the frontier was a glass thing. It caught the light beautifully, and it broke easily. The first sign came as a tremor through sheet, the ground, 3 sets of hooves drawing near. Jed was the one who heard it first. He stepped out of the barn and shaded his eyes. "Riders," he said simply. Clara was at the porch, shelling beans, and froze at the sound. Elias stepped out beside her, wiping dust from his hands. He caught the look on her face and knew before she said a word. "Silas?" She nodded. The 3 figures crested the ridge, sun glaring off the metal star pinned to the lead rider's vest. Silas Wynn rode at the front, smile too wide, too slick. "Afternoon, sister," he called, swinging down from his horse. "You've been hard to find." Emma darted behind Clara's skirts. Elias moved forward, quiet, steady. "You're trespassing," Silas laughed, that old condescending drawl dripping from his words. "You're hiding a runaway widow and her ward. Law says the child's mine." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and waved it like a trophy. "Court order from Missouri. Signed and sealed." Elias didn't even look at it. "That paper don't mean a damn thing here," Silas sneered. "You think your little patch of dirt makes you king?" "No," Elias said evenly. "But it's enough ground to stand on." Behind him, Jed and 2 other hands appeared, rifles resting easy against their shoulders. The silence stretched until even the cicadas seemed to hush. Silas shifted in his boots. "You can't stop the law." Elias took a slow step forward. "I don't aim to stop the law. I aim to stop you." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Silas spat into the dust, swung into his saddle, and snarled, "This ain't over." Elias watched them ride away until the horizon swallowed their silhouettes. Only then did he turn to Clara. Her knees buckled, and he caught her before she fell. "He'll be back," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Then I'll be ready." That night the ranch glowed with lanterns. No one slept. Elias sat by the window with his rifle across his lap. Clara brewed coffee neither of them drank. When dawn finally broke, it carried a strange peace. Sometimes safety isn't the absence of danger. It's knowing who will stand beside you when it comes. A declaration of love, a bond of family days passed, but Silas didn't return. Life crept back into rhythm, though it felt changed somehow deeper, more deliberate. as if each moment wanted to be remembered. One evening, the sky burned gold, the wheat shimmering under the low sun. Elias sat on the porch steps, sharpening a knife, when Clara joined him with 2 cups of coffee. Emma chased fireflies in the field beyond, her laughter echoing like bells. "You ever think about before?" Elias asked quietly. "Every day," Clara said, "but less and less like a wound." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You've got a way of mendin' things without tryin'." She smiled faintly. "And you've got a way of fixin' broken strangers. Guess we make a fair team then." The air between them thickened, full of all the things neither had dared to say. "Finally," she whispered, "I never had a man offer me ground before just reasons to run." Elias set the cup down and reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing her wrist. "Then stay. This land's firm enough for both of us." The words landed like a vow. They sat in silence until the stars came out, listening to Emma's laughter fade into the hum of crickets. When Elias finally turned to her, his voice was low, certain. "Clara, I reckon I don't want to spend another day without seeing you walk through that door." She looked at him, eyes bright with the truth she'd been holding back. "You already know my answer." A week later, they rode to a small chapel in Amarillo. No guests, no music, just a preacher with a weathered Bible and a sunbeam through the window. Clara wore a simple blue dress, Elias a clean shirt that didn't quite fit his shoulders. When the preacher said, "Do you take this man?" she said yes, without hesitation. When he asked Elias, the rancher just smiled and said, "Already have." Emma clutched wildflowers, grinning. As they stepped outside, she tugged Elias's sleeve and said shyly, "Papa." The big man froze, eyes glistening. "That'll do just fine," he whispered. When they got home, he carved a sign above the gate, "Cole and Family." Clara traced the letters with her fingers. For the first time in her life, her name belonged somewhere. Harvest, home, and hope realized autumn painted the plains gold. The fields rippled like sunlight trapped in motion. The cattle grazed fat and slow. The ranch that once echoed with silence now sang with work and laughter. Elias and Jed harvested wheat, while Emma carried bundles of wildflowers to decorate the table. Clara handled the books, humming under her breath as she marked the day's accounts. The walls of the cabin, once bare, were covered in small reminders of a life, a sketch Emma had drawn, a calendar marked with birthdays, a quilt stitched from old clothes. Then came the letter, delivered by a rider from town. Elias opened it on the porch while Clara and Emma watched. His eyes moved across the page, slow and careful. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled just a little. "Court dismissed Silas's claim. Guardianship's ours legal and final." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. She blinked hard, tears spilling despite her smile. Elias folded the paper and said quietly, "Told you this land was firm." That night they held a harvest dinner. Neighbors came from miles around, ranchers, drifters, even the storekeeper from town. The table overflowed with food: beans, cornbread, roasted quail, fresh milk. Jed played fiddle on the porch, and Emma danced barefoot in the dirt, her laughter rising into the night. As the lanterns flickered, Clara looked across the table at Elias. "Our first meal together was dry bread under a broken putter wagon," she said softly. Elias smiled, lines crinkling at his eyes. "And now, she said, "we have food, a roof, and a name." He reached for her hand. "And that's all a person ever needs." Outside, the moon rose full and bright. The wind moved gently through the wheat, whispering against the cabin walls. The world hadn't become kind, but within that small piece of Texas, kindness had found its home. When the guests left and the night went quiet, Clara stepped outside and looked across the fields. The porch light glowed behind her, and she thought of the road she'd taken to get here. 5 days without food, one loaf of bread, a stranger's hand in the dark. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with trumpets, they arrive tired, muddy, and carrying coffee. Bread, heart, and a new beginning. Evening settled soft over the ranch. The sky brushed in rose and violet. The porch swing creaked gently as Emma giggled beside her mother, her boots scuffing the boards. The smell of baking bread drifted from the kitchen window, mingling with the sweet tang of hay. Elias was out by the fence line, hammering the last plank into place. Each strike echoed steady across the open land. When he straightened, the sun caught his hair, turning it the same gold as the wheat behind him. Clara watched from the swing, her heart full in a way words couldn't carry. "Papa's working too hard again," Emma said with a grin. Clara smiled. That's what papas do. When Elias finally joined them, dust on his sleeves and light in his eyes, he leaned against the porch rail. "Fence'll hold through winter now." Clara handed him a cup of coffee. "You've said that every season." He sipped, smiling. "One of these years, I'll be right." They laughed together, the kind of laughter that comes only after pain's been turned to memory. Clara looked out over the fields and whispered, "It started with a loaf of bread." Elias tilted his head. "What did?" "All of this," she said softly. "You gave us bread when we had nothing, and your heart right along with it." He set the cup down, reached for her hand. "That's all I ever had to give, and it was enough," she said. The sky darkened, and the first stars pricked through. Emma curled up on the swing between them, head resting on her mother's lap, small hand gripping Elias's finger. The air filled with the quiet hum of crickets and the faint creak of wood beneath them. Clara breathed deep, letting the smell of bread and the sound of peace settle inside her. She thought of the woman she had been, the one whispering in the mud, holding her child against the storm. That woman had believed she was broken beyond repair. But maybe, she thought, you aren't broken by what you lose. You're remade by what you find. Elias looked at her and smiled. "You're thinking too hard. Just remembering," she said. "Best not to forget," he replied. "That way we don't take the calm for granted." The wind swept through the wheat, whispering like a prayer. If anyone rode that road tomorrow, they'd see a small ranch with a single porch light glowing steady in the night. They wouldn't know the story behind it, the widow who whispered for mercy, the rancher who answered with bread, and the child whose laughter built a home. But the land would remember. It always does. Because sometimes in the Wild West, the grandest tales aren't about gunfights or gold. They're about mercy shared between strangers. They're about the courage it takes to stay when leaving is easier. They're about love found in the mud, steady as the heartbeat of the plains. And if you listen closely, the wind still carries their story of bread and heart, and the moment one act of kindness changed everything. Where bullets missed but hearts didn't. Welcome home, partner.